Breaking tonight, Ottawa just announced that the Honourable Anita Anand, Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs, will leave the country on May 19 and will not return until May 22. In 4 days, she will cross 3 nations, Latvia, Estonia, and Sweden. She will walk into a Canadian military base where a young Canadian soldier died less than 4 months ago. She will inaugurate a Canadian embassy on the doorstep of the Russian border, and she will sit at a NATO foreign minister's table in a coastal Swedish city that controls one of the busiest maritime choke points in the world. This is not a courtesy visit. This is not a ribbon-cutting tour. This is Canada planting its flag along the entire eastern edge of the transatlantic alliance, at a moment when the Atlantic itself is being redefined. You are watching Canada Next, and tonight we walk this trip with her, mile by mile, and we explain why every single stop matters far more than the press release suggests. Let's begin in Riga. On May 19, Anita Anand will land in the Latvian capital and meet her counterpart, Baiba Braja. The two will speak about defense industrial collaboration, which translated into plain Canadian means joint weapons production, ammunition supply chains, and the slow welding together of two defense economies that already share a battlefield posture against the same threat. Braja is not just any foreign minister. She used to run NATO's public diplomacy in Brussels. She understands the alliance from the inside, and she has spent the last 2 years pushing for one thing above all else: that Canada's military presence in Latvia must be more than symbolic. That presence has a name: Operation REASSURANCE. It began in 2014, the year Russia first invaded Ukraine. It has grown every year since. And as of this moment, roughly 2,000 Canadian Armed Forces members are stationed on Latvian soil, with that number set to climb to 2,200 persistently deployed troops by the end of 2026. Canada is the framework nation for the NATO Multinational Brigade in Latvia, a force pulled from 14 NATO allies, sitting on the Russian doorstep, training daily for a war that no one wants, but everyone is preparing for. This is the largest Canadian overseas military operation in the world. There is nothing bigger, not in Iraq, not in the Sahel, not in the Indo-Pacific. The biggest mission flying the Maple Leaf is the one Anita Anand is about to step into. And she will step into it at Camp Labrie, a name most Canadians have never heard, a facility near Riga that serves as a core compound for the Canadian-led brigade. But Camp Labrie is also where Gunner Halmagean died on January 29, 2026. He was 24 years old. He was from Hamilton, Ontario. It was his first overseas deployment. The circumstances of his death remain under investigation by Canadian and Latvian military police. His body was flown home to Trenton in February, then carried down the Highway of Heroes to Toronto. Dear viewers, this is the ground Anita Anand will walk on. And the symbolism is not lost on anyone in Ottawa. Sending the foreign minister, not the defense minister, but the foreign minister, to that specific compound is a statement. It says that Canada's diplomacy and Canada's military are now operating as a single instrument of national power on the eastern flank. The line between global affairs and national defense is blurring, and it is blurring deliberately. Anita Anand understands this better than anyone in the cabinet, because in January 2022, 3 weeks before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, she was in Kyiv. She was Canada's defense minister at the time. She told reporters bluntly that Russian aggression on the Ukrainian border was a known fact, even as the Ukrainian government itself was still publicly downplaying the risk. Western intelligence was right. Anand was right. The invasion came on February 24th. She does not need to be briefed on Eastern Europe. She has lived this file from inside the war room. That credibility is what she carries into the next stop. On May 20, she crosses the border into Estonia. And in Tallinn, 3 things happen back-to-back that, taken together, redraw Canada's diplomatic map of Europe. First, the Canada-Baltic 3+1 Foreign Ministers Meeting. This is a format Canada has used since 2020. Canada plus Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, sitting as equals around one table. The agenda is coordinated support for Ukraine, economic resilience, critical supply chains, and transatlantic security. Translation: how do four countries on opposite sides of the Atlantic, none of them great powers, build a parallel security architecture that does not collapse if Washington decides to walk away tomorrow? That is the actual question being asked in that room. No one will say it on the record, but everyone understands it. Second, Anand will speak at Latitude 59, Estonia's flagship technology and startup conference. She will meet Estonia's Minister of Economy and Industries, Erkki Keldo. The agenda is artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and digital trade. This is not soft diplomacy. This is Canada looking at Estonia, a country of 1.3 million people that punches at the weight of nations 10 times its size in cybersecurity, e-government, and digital infrastructure, and saying out loud that the next chapter of Canadian economic strategy runs through Tallinn, not just through Silicon Valley. Third, and this is the one Ottawa is most eager to publicize, Anand will officially inaugurate the Embassy of Canada to the Republic of Estonia. Canada has had a diplomatic mission in Tallinn since 1991, but for decades it operated under the umbrella of the ambassador in Riga. In 2023, that office was upgraded to a full embassy with a resident ambassador. 3 years later, Anita Anand is walking through the door to make it official, in person, with the maple leaf raised. This is what diplomatic permanence looks like. This is Canada saying we are here, we are staying, and we are building. Before we move to the third stop, a quick word for anyone watching this channel and trying to understand where Canadian foreign policy is actually going under the Carney government. Subscribe and turn on the bell. Every weekday, we break down the geopolitical chessboard from a Canada-first perspective. Because the major networks will tell you Anand visited 3 countries. We tell you why. On May 21st, Anand boards a plane for Helsingborg, Sweden. And this is where the entire trip clicks into place. Helsingborg is a small coastal city on the Öresund Strait, the narrow body of water that separates Sweden from Denmark, and serves as the gateway between the North Sea and the Baltic Sea. Roughly 40,000 vessels pass through this strait every year. Whoever controls Öresund controls Baltic maritime traffic. And Sweden, which joined NATO in March 2024 after 2 centuries of armed neutrality, is now hosting its very first NATO ministerial meeting on its own soil. The location is not an accident. The venue is the Clarion Hotel CU, just steps from the water. The opening dinner is at Sofiero Castle. The symbolism is layered like an onion. The North Atlantic Council will gather here on May 21st and 22nd, chaired by NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. Foreign ministers from all 32 allied nations will be in the room. The agenda is officially focused on coordinated support for Ukraine and collective deterrence. Unofficially, this meeting is the political launchpad for the NATO summit of heads of state and government scheduled for Ankara, Turkey, in July 2026. Helsingborg sets the table. Ankara serves the meal. And Canada wants its priorities baked into the menu before the leaders arrive. So what are Canada's priorities? Anita Anand has been remarkably explicit about this. Speaking to Euronews from Brussels last week, she said Canada has signed more than 20 security, defense, and economic agreements around the world in the last year alone, and that this is, in her own words, just getting started. She framed it as a middle power strategy, a reorientation away from binary dependence on Washington and toward like-minded partners on shared values. Territorial integrity, state sovereignty, multilateral trade. 3 words you will hear over and over in the Helsingborg readouts. and behind her sits Mark Carney himself. In January 2026, the Prime Minister stood at the World Economic Forum in Davos and spoke openly about a rupture in the American-led system of global governance. He called on middle powers to chart a new path. That speech went viral in foreign policy circles. It also raised eyebrows in Washington, where it was read, correctly, as Canada formally putting Plan B on the table. Helsingborg is one of the rooms where Plan B gets built. This is also why the Arctic file matters. Anand has used every NATO meeting since taking the foreign affairs portfolio in May 2025 to push the alliance towards stronger Arctic security coordination. She did it with Rutte in Brussels. She did it at the G7 Ministerial in France. She will do it again in Helsingborg. Because if you look at a globe instead of a map, Canada, Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Iceland form a single, continuous northern arc. And that arc is where the next strategic competition with Russia is unfolding. Helsingborg is the southern entry point to the Baltic. The Arctic is the northern entry point to North America. They are two ends of the same chessboard. Canada now sits at both. Here's the bottom line, dear viewers. In 4 days, Anita Anand will walk through a Canadian-led NATO base, sit with 3 Baltic foreign ministers, open a new embassy, address a tech conference, and shape the agenda of a 32-nation alliance ahead of a summit in Turkey. She will do all of this while carrying the memory of a 24-year-old Canadian soldier who never came home. This is not 3 separate trips. This is one single arc. The arc of a country that has decided it can no longer afford to outsource its security to a neighbor that no longer behaves like one. Stay with Canada next in the days ahead. We will be tracking every press conference, every joint statement, every quiet bilateral on the margins. Because what looks like a routine ministerial itinerary on paper is, in reality, the clearest signal yet that Ottawa is finished waiting on Washington. The pivot is no longer rhetorical. The pivot is now operational. This is Canada Next. I'll see you tomorrow.